Knitting is very much a metaphor for life. Most people never knit for themselves. They're always knitting for other people. So what you do when you're looking for colors is you're dreaming of that other person, because so much of knitting is simply an act of love. You're putting yourself in the other person's perspective, bringing them into you, and then you see what colors work best. Knitting is an exploration of who you are and who you want to be, because you're thinking of the character that you're knitting for. You're making a loving statement. You're making a statement that connects with our empathy, our desire to live with one another, to engage one another, to help one another. Here we have Republicans and Democrats, and the end result is a fabric that we can all wear when we learn to accommodate one another. When we do nothing with one another, all we have are strands of yarn that get scattered here, there, anywhere. Who knows? Anyway, so I'm on a black right. No, I'm on a yellow net. Holy mackerel, this goes fast. My name's Eugene Bourgeois, and my wife and I founded Philosopher's World together in 1985. We did so because what we wanted to do was to make a market for farmers for their fleece. We didn't have much of a concept about business or how to go about doing any of this, but we had a passion and a dream that we could. And so we just went forward as if that dream were true and valid, and we would go as far as we could. My goal was to pay farmers an average of close to $2 a pound for their fleece wool at a time when the market was paying us between 10 and 30 cents a pound. I felt if I could make a very high quality yarn from which we could develop heirloom sweaters that will last a lifetime. Okay, Leo, do you want to sit down? Will you sit down? Okay, yes. All right, now make sure to come back when I ask you to. Of course, that's a faint hope. Walking and looking for mushrooms is very much a solitary activity. And normally I just retreat into my head and try to let the mushrooms speak to me and direct me to where they will be. Oh, hello there. Hello. Well, mushrooms share a lot of our DNA, and a major part of what allows the world to be this vibrant, alive being that it is. I certainly do feel mushrooms are sacred, but I think everything is sacred. when I stepped on this land, and the feeling that surged through me, coming right from the ground up through my feet, was this is where I want to die. And as macabre as that sounds, in contrast, it was a completion. It was a whole filling completion of the circle of my life. I knew not only is this where I want to die, but this is where I want to live. And boy, has it ever allowed me to make some big dreams. Starting with building a farm.
I wasn't brought up spiritually, and he was, and I think that's why he felt this spiritual connection to here, whereas I just said, if you like it, we can buy it. I couldn't see what was special about it. It was a square field with not a tree in sight.
It has a real spiritual feel to it. You know, it sort of feels like it's the center of the world and the center of the universe. And of course, you know, it's also the home of the world's largest nuclear complex. You hear the hum all the time. You hear its traffic noise. It just asserts itself. It doesn't seem to pay attention to our needs and hopes. I grew up in the 1950s. Nuclear power presented a great hope, and we all thought that nuclear power was just God's gift to humanity. Is it safe to live by a nuclear power station? Well, I carried my father's optimism that of course it's safe. You know, if this is owned by the government, they wouldn't do anything that was unsafe. But as it turns out, Ann's father was a low-temperature physicist at Cambridge University. He also spent a year here in Canada where he worked at the National Research Council at the time when the CANDU reactors were being built.
When we chose this land, we asked my father if he would see what people thought about living next to a nuclear power station, and they all said, being from the industry really themselves, oh, it's completely safe.
Oh, he said, Eugene, I would have no fear whatsoever of living by a CANDU reactor. Of all the reactors in the world, this is the safest, cleanest form of energy produced. So we decided to buy the land. So we framed our house that summer. Now, I had never picked up a hammer, so I certainly didn't know what I was getting into. But that didn't stop me. That didn't faze me in the least. It bothered everybody else around me. Not Ann. We were together. And miracle of miracles, I had actually succeeded in building a house.
It's just a heavenly place to live. Provincial Park is 3 minutes away, and the lake is 15 minutes down the park. And I can't imagine a lovelier place to live.
My thesis was in the area of ritual magic, and I was torn with how much like religion science is.
Having done some philosophy at London School of Economics, I vowed I would never, ever have anything to do with philosophy again. What do you do, marry a philosopher? That was really rather funny. But he's a sort of independent thinker, which is very different from what we were having to study in philosophy, and who said what when, which doesn't interest me at all.
I'd had a discussion with my father-in-law. He was adamant that I was wasting my time studying philosophy when I was a good mathematician. And I said, "You physicists, you have it so easy." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you think of a problem. You work on the parameters. You set up a protocol, an experiment. You run the protocol, you run the experiment. You get the answer, and then you get a Nobel Prize. And it's easy street from then on." He said, no, Eugene, don't be silly. Don't be silly. That's not how it works. I said, "Well, tell me, how does it work?" He said, "Well, yeah, you're right. We've got a problem. Work on experimental methodology. Run the experiment. It doesn't work." I said, "How do you know it doesn't work?" "You've thought of the problem deeply. You've created good logical resolutions. You've analyzed it. You've run the experiment. And now you say you don't get the right answer. But you got an answer. How do you know that answer is wrong?" "Well, it's just wrong." I said, "But what's the basis of that knowledge? How do you know that?" And we went around and around and around that circle until finally he said, "Well, that's what I hate about philosophy." And I said, "That is exactly what I love about philosophy, because it asks these fundamental questions that we tend to overlook in our day-to-day life." If you've ever managed sheep and had a flock of sheep, you'd understand that they're people. They're real. They care. They have empathy. They care for one another. They care for lots of things. John Farrell always told me that whenever he would come here to shear, he would get a headache from all the gas that was in the air. I never noticed it.
I said to Eugene, I said, "What is that smell?" And he quick went and started shutting doors and windows and stuff. And as he was doing that, the sheep I was shearing literally just died as I held her. She just died right there. And I thought, what is going on here? I said, "Do you mind if I do an autopsy on this ewe and just see what killed her? I'd be really interested to do that." So we got a knife and we opened her up, and her lungs were just a mess. They were just mush.
They were just riddled with emphysema. There was nothing there. It was just tragic. She had literally suffocated to death.
Her lungs were definitely not healthy. And I had caught her. She was a normal functioning animal. When I had caught her to shear her, she was quite, I thought, quite normal. But whatever was in the air, it killed her.
This was life that was just taken unrealistically, unfairly. But I recovered from that by not accepting what Ontario Hydro said, by not accepting that I was just an inferior farmer, that I was just making mistakes, that these accidents were never happening.
Today, Eugene Bourgeois' philosophical search for answers is being put to a severe test. He is now looking for an answer to the question of what to do about a neighbor he says is making him ill and killing his sheep.
I was picking stones in a field, and and it came over and hit me like a ton of bricks. I had a massive headache, I was nauseous and disoriented, and I staggered home.
That Neighbour is the Bruce Nuclear Power Station, built on the shore of Lake Huron, 3 kilometers from Bourgeois' farm. The CANDU reactors inside are cooled with heavy water made on site with hydrogen sulfide gas, an extremely toxic gas, more toxic than cyanide. Over the past few years, this potentially lethal gas has escaped from the plant several times.
And I knew what it was, and I phoned the plant and told them they'd had a gas release, and they said, oh, they didn't think there was much of a gas release, and that not to worry about it.
And when our nuclear neighbor fumigated us with hydrogen sulfide, I just felt it was an industrial accident. These things happen, and I felt they were mistaken and that they would want to do the right thing. Over the course of a number of years, I discovered that not only were they not mistaken, they knew what they were doing, and they didn't care, and they could get away with it. So I guess some people would pack up and leave. I decided to challenge them.
He has decided to take on the nuclear plant single-handedly, to fight the public corporation until they recognize that the emissions from their plant may endanger public safety.
They maintain that nuclear power is safe, and I'm inclined to agree with it, but they want to look at the world and say, look, we don't think that problem exists. It doesn't matter that this is all happening to you. Either you're crazy, or you're out to lunch, or you're just dissatisfied with your life, or you just want to blame us for all of your problems. Why don't you grow up? I mean, you've dropped out of society. Why don't you become a useful and productive member? You know, and they've said all of those things to me.
Don White is Corporate Relations Officer for the Bruce Nuclear Plant.
There's no evidence to indicate this kind of effect from the low concentrations of gas that have gotten from the plant. Certainly the employees who work with it day in and day out have not experienced the kinds of things that Mr. Bourgeois claims he's experienced.
And Eugene Bourgeois, the philosopher turned farmer turned activist, has no intention of quitting.
I think the human spirit is a pretty dynamic and powerful instrument, and nobody can push that out. You can't trample on it. Dictators throughout history have tried to knock people down and knock the human spirit down, and I think when you do, you can kill the body, you can destroy all kinds of properties that are associated with the person. Even that girl there, you can't shut her up, no matter what you want to do, and they can't shut me up, and they're not going to, and they're going to lose.
Calendars. 1990. Aha. And so in 1989, I used calendars to record incidents. Heavy water plant. Invoices. Boy, oh boy. My hypothesis was that these were well-meaning, well-intentioned people who simply misunderstood. And if I could show them how they were misinformed, then they would change. I couldn't conceive of people within an industry being such cold-hearted murderers, willing to murder my sheep, willing to murder me. For me, what they meant was that I was going to have a lifelong challenge.
We've discovered that it's not that easy to be neighbours of the world's largest nuclear power station, and we fight for them to be safe. They're rather bigger than we are, and their resources are much larger than ours too.
This is my letter to Robert Franklin, the chairman of the board of Ontario Hydro, and invoicing them for the dead lambs. And at that time, the commercial interest rate was 2.5% per month on unpaid balances. So at the end of every month, I would add in the 2.5% per month, and it's ongoing. They have never paid the bill.
Our next oral intervention is by Mr. Eugene Bourgeois.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Industrial contaminants from the Bruce site have routinely fumigated our property, sometimes in highly toxic concentrations. It was late April and I had pastured our ewes on the grass around our orchard and garden just beside our house. On this occasion, it was as if somebody came up from behind me and banged me on the head with a large piece of wood. The pain was just that intense. I was temporarily blinded, seeing bright lights and stars. My daughter, who was playing on a pile of hay mulch, became suicidal in the aftermath, writing her last will and testament. As might be imagined, this is an unfortunate and terrible event for any parent to experience. Again, no one at Ontario Hydro seemed to care enough about the impact she suffered even to inquire about her well-being or the impacts of their operations on our family. Stakeholder residents, it would appear, are simply collateral damage in any environmental anomalies. We need you, Madam Chair, we need you to stand up for us, the innocent victims of this industry and regulatory nonchalance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bourgeois.
We felt at the time, and this was over many years in the late 80s into the 90s, that we did a thorough review of those concerns. But that doesn't obviously necessarily say that the member of the public is fully satisfied.
All right, so as I was saying, we need to get some measurements. So I'm just going to try and zoom in on Bruce Power here and try and find you. And let's see, Huron right is at end of...
My name is Jim Young. When I first met Eugene, I thought he looked like a sheep. But, you know, that was just his personality and his beard, and I soon came to know that he was a very nice man.
There's our house.
Yeah, okay. So you were standing approximately here, is that correct?
At the garden.
One summer day I came out here. Eugene said, let's just have a chat. He said I was out in the field and all of a sudden I was just overcome. Then when Ontario Hydro came out to make measurements, they didn't show very many high levels. And I said, well, you're on a shoreline. Have they not looked at the thermal internal boundary layer? And he said, what's that? The problem in an area like a shoreline is that you have competing flows, that a plume would come up into the stable layer from the air flowing over the lake, which was cold. As the air flows over the shoreline, it creates what's known as a boundary layer. So it creates a division between the frictional forces near the surface and the non-frictional forces in the atmosphere. So if the plume is emitted into the non-frictional layer, it travels in a straight line, just carries on doing its own thing. But when it hits this boundary between the stable air and the unstable air, all of a sudden the plume is brought to the ground very rapidly because underneath the boundary are thermals heating from the ground, mixing the air below. And when it does, whatever concentrations in the plume at the boundary is going to be the same concentration at the ground. It's going to be very high levels, and it's going to come down in a big swoosh, and then it's going to disappear. So I said, it seems to me that's what you're describing, that, you know, all of a sudden you were overcome by a wave of the stuff and then it was gone. And so he said, okay, I've never heard of that. What did he wrote down the name, and so he phoned John Lumley and said, this friend of mine said, you know, thermal internal boundary layer. What do you know about that? And he said, oh,
I totally forgot about that. Of course that's what it is.
What will happen is from the shoreline, the thermal internal boundary layer, what it'll start growing in all sorts of directions here, because this is a very complex shoreline. So it'll start growing here, it'll start growing here. It all depends which way the wind is blowing. And so the release height of that thing is about 60, and a bit of a plume rise. Then yes, there's a very good possibility that it would actually occur right over this area.
Yeah.
I think now he's out to get perhaps a little vindication for the fact that he was gassed and nobody admitted it. But I think deep down he just wants to have everybody in this area be safe. He tried to say, hey guys, you know, you're not being a good neighbor and this is what happened to me and can we fix it please? So it doesn't happen again. And all he got back was, oh no, it couldn't have been us, you know, you're wrong. And so I think that really colored the relationship. 1 year, Eugene's farm had tritium levels in vegetation almost 10 times higher than anywhere else. Now, why would that be the case? It could be contamination in the soil. How did it get there? So there are all sorts of possibilities for why it would happen.
I live here, so I'm going to be breathing it in my air and eating it, no matter what. So at least when I'm growing my food, I know it's grown without other chemicals. Radionuclides I can't do anything about, but I know there's no other chemicals in it, so it should otherwise be very healthy food. Apart from incidents like the fumigations, with toxic gases in high concentrations, our animals have all lived good old ages. I don't have any particular interest in it. I deal with it because it's an outrage. It's happened to me. I have an inside track. I'm the only one who has that inside knowledge. And I have no fear, and I have no concerns. So that puts me in an ideal position to challenge these guys.
Is there not a bit of a David and Goliath story here, though?
Well,
I mean,
people can characterize it that way. Yes, of course there is. Of course there is. I mean, I have less of a chance than a snowball in hell. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the snowball that's in hell. You are what you are. You know, things are what they are. So just accept that. So I wonder if there's going to be a parking spot.
That's the battle.
That's the battle, yeah. Well, here we are.
Shall we do this? Shall we do this?
As you characterize it, time for the battle.
Since field testing began, there has never been an instance when unwanted radiological chemicals were not found in abundance in our vegetables, soil, agricultural products, and our flock, etc. Maybe you can comment on where you're getting this information.
Yes, thank you. The University of Waterloo measured the radioactivity in our urine and our sheep's urine and found that my wife's urine was highest. I think it was 780 becquerels per liter. I'm not a scientist, I'm a philosopher. Before I was a farmer, I'm now retired, of course, but in 2009, our leafy garden vegetables had 65 times more radioactivity than any other sample anywhere, including right beside Bruce Power.
I'd like to hear, this all ongoing debate about whether there is any impact about living beside a nuclear power plant.
The general consensus supported by the UNSCIA report, which is the report of the United Nations Scientific Committee on the effects of radiation, is that there is no identifiable risks to the communities living around nuclear power plant installations.
In order to make these statements that you would like to make, and I would like you to be able to make, and I would like Bruce Power to be able to make. We need to have reliable data. Once that data is present, then any numbers of analyses can be conducted. But without the data, just as Mr. Saunders recognized, without the data on climate change and climate data, you can't understand the present. We can't scientifically verify that we understand the present. And that is the point of trying to devise and create the community health data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation.
I thought the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission would be
all over it.
Except that the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, as I've since learned, is really public relations flack for the industry. What they do is try to cover up the industry's mistakes and errors and make it sound so complicated that an ordinary person couldn't possibly get his or her head around it. And you know, you're just confused. Not surprising. These are really complicated things, so it's not surprising you're confused. And besides, look at you. You haven't even combed your hair this morning. You must be confused.
That's. Yeah, I think for a while I hesitate to say this, but I mean you're your own worst enemy at times because of the way you look. Unfortunately.
That's right.
And
that's right.
Nothing you do about it.
But I couldn't care less.
I know.
And that's and whether I look this way or don't look this way, I'm still a Canadian citizen. I still pay taxes.
Don't get me wrong.
No,
I'm just saying that for the
do.
general people out there, they're going to make a judgment.
Of course they are. I certainly get that. I've lived me all my life, so I certainly get that. But on the other hand, that's not my issue. It's not my concern.
No, I know.
I don't really care what other people think of me. I only care about what I do. Does this turn it on?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on. Thank you. I forgot to comb my hair this morning. I'm sorry. Our analysis of Bruce Power's emergency planning, which CNSC reviewed in 2009, places Inverhuron residents at severe health risks in the event of a nuclear emergency. CNSC also permits Bruce Power to evacuate workers from the site before evacuating these vulnerable members of the community. The Bruce stations do offer safe shelter, while the cottages and trailers in Inverhuron do not. As is to be seen from our submission, Bruce Power's language and that of CNSC is peppered with words such as likely, unlikely, and other vague terms that have no definitive scientific meaning in the context in which they are used. In the event of a nuclear accident, however, all such linguistic tools are useless. At this stage, it is certain that one has occurred. The question that must then be asked is, how prepared are we for such an event?
In every situation that I've been involved in, either working for industry or working for the public over my career, I have always advised my industrial clients to be open with what's going on, what they're trying to do, because I find that the public responds better to that. Now, the nuclear industry in general has not been that way. They've tended to say, well, people are afraid of nucleoids and, they're afraid they're going to be fried and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that comes from the fact that they've not been open and honest and said, the risks are very low. If something was to happen, this is what you would feel or what you would see or whatever. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to tell you anything. They just want to keep it all quiet. They want to just say, trust us, and people don't respond well to that. And so what we're looking for in the new work is to build a three-dimensional weather model for this immediate area, then release the plume into that area and see how it behaves. See whether there are hot spots, see whether it goes, if it does spiral up the coast or create situations that are not expected.
I know for a fact that I was fumigated. So I know for a fact that when we develop a robust model that helps to describe the atmospheric environment of this region, that model will be available to shoreline communities all over the world, so that innocent people anywhere and everywhere can start to have protection. I'm a philosopher, and you know, it's a really intriguing problem. You know, I have interests in physics of the situation, and I find it really fascinating to do this forensic work to validate the experiences I know I had. Maybe that sounds strange to people, but the only way I will ever be able to achieve justice is by doing this. We knew that there was something very wrong, and went to see a gynecologist, and there she learned that she had ovarian cancer. Prognosis was 1 to 2 years maximum that Ann would live, and so we prepared for Ann's death then. The day Ann died, I came here and found I was able to become totally lost. Finally, I saw a deer trail and thought, well, trails all lead somewhere. And as far as I know, I'm nowhere. And found these 2 juvenile morels, and I asked them if they would carry my love to Ann, and with my love, my gratitude for such a complete and wonderful life, to thank her for that, and to remind Ann that now what she must do is simply to follow her own inner light, simply to allow herself to soar and discover where she is and who she is. And I was both so very glad and so very sad. I think you mischaracterize. You look upon this as if it's a chore. I'm a mystical philosopher. I know that when you engage in mystical philosophy as a lived experience, you will have adversity. You will have things go wrong. It's a necessary feature of being a mystical philosopher, of choosing to live a traditional life. The point of things going wrong is to allow us to learn how we respond to things going wrong. So unlike your characterization that this was a sacrifice, it was no sacrifice whatsoever. It was all in keeping with the lifestyle that I have chosen for myself. I just tried to tell that story. I had a fair bit of publicity, so much publicity that in fact one pollster took me aside after a focus group that I attended and said, "Are you that sheep farmer?" I said, "Well, I am a sheep farmer. I don't know if I'm that sheep farmer." And he said, "Ontario Hydro had wanted to build new nuclear power stations in Ontario, and it ran focus groups in 15 communities around the province. And in 9 of those 15 communities, people spontaneously said that they'd have a lot more faith in Ontario Hydro if it wasn't for that sheep farmer." And he said that was so significant, it went straight to the president's office, and their plans to build new nuclear power stations were canceled.
In September of 2020, I came over to visit Eugene and unfortunately found him slumped over on the floor. It turned out he'd passed away from a heart attack the night before. It was a bit of a shock, especially since it was, within 4 months of Ann dying. But he always expressed to me that he wanted to die about the same time as Ann. Since that time, I've been managing the wool business and the property. And everybody I've talked to basically says good things about both Ann and Eugene, that they were lovely people, they were very helpful people. I learned a lot from them. Part of the work that I was helping Eugene do toward the end was to look at whether he'd been impacted by hydrogen sulfide all those years ago. And then the report really concluded that everything Eugene had been saying could be proven scientifically. We ran a model, we simulated to the best of our ability, we used the meteorology from the days that he said he was gassed, and everything we did confirmed what Eugene has been saying. So I think he was vindicated in the sense that he'd been saying all these things, people had been saying, no, that couldn't have happened, but it did happen. And as I wander the property or mow the lawn, or I reflect on what Eugene and Ann's legacy is. And I really think Eugene's story is a love story. He bought this land because he fell in love with it when he saw it. He built all the infrastructure. He married Ann because he loved her, and it was a love story that lasted over 50 years. He loved his family, and he reacted when they were attacked by hydrogen sulfide. He wanted to have industry admit their mistake, take steps so that it wouldn't happen again. And unfortunately, they didn't do that. They decided to say it was bogus. Hence, he had a lifelong vendetta, really to try and protect his family. And ultimately to protect this community of Inverhuron that he lived in. Eugene's story is a true love story. His love for life, his love for the land, his love for the community, his family, and his wish to make sure that the community continues to be safe.
Darling, I know hard to let go. Soon I will hold you again. Longer days when I'm away, but we'll both pretend to be bold. Darling, I've never been bold. Flowers you brought, my stomach in knots, but you never seem to be scared. My heart's on pause whenever you're gone, but one day we'll go anywhere. Darling, I've never been there. We will travel many miles. Will we ever see home again? Waves that